Yes, everybody, how are we doing? Thomas Frank has agreed to deal with Tottenham Hotspur on personal terms with the club. We are just waiting on Spurs and Brentford to reach an agreement over the release clause of his contract at Brentford. There is agreement between Tottenham and Thomas Frank on the project, salary, length of contract, budget, positions, and players to target, according to Fabrizio Romano. David Ornstein of The Athletic saying Tottenham make contact with Brentford as Thomas Frank's appointment nears completion. Spurs hope to agree a deal in the next 48 hours. That's exactly why we're filming this video right now for you guys. And then lastly, from John Cross of the Mirror, Tottenham are likely to step up their pursuit of Thomas Frank in the coming days. They see him as an ideal candidate due to his style of football, the way he builds and improves his players, and he will also have the scope to improve the squad ahead of a return to the Champions League. John Cross of the Mirror. I mean, Dave, it looks like it's going to happen any moment now. It's
Mhm.
going to happen in the next 48 hours. That's why we're filming this video for everybody. I mean, we're going to give our thoughts on it. Thomas Frank is imminent.
Yeah, this is the thing with this new age stuff, Jack. Everyone sort of knows that this is going to happen, but behind the scenes, Tottenham still have to get him in the door, get all the media stuff done, recorded, and everything else. So, regardless, we sort of all know it's going to happen. That's why it's going to take the next 24 to 48 hours, just because of the media and all that sort of stuff that Tottenham will want to put in place before it's announced. But Jack, how are you feeling about Thomas Frank? I mean, look, I look online. I think there's a lot of people that make a lot of positives for him. I think that this is going to be the right decision for Tottenham moving forward. This is exactly what we need right now. Someone that's a good tactician. Someone that will, adapt to what we've got rather than need massive overhaul of investment. And then there's other people like me who are a bit skeptical, a bit worried about this, which I'll probably go into greater detail.
I'm not totally thrilled by it. I documented before on TikTok on the shorts. Please, everybody, follow us over there. I also said, on various streams that I would have given Ange, that third season just because I felt like he deserved it. And it would have been nice to see him, at least be given the opportunity to see if he could handle multiple competitions on all fronts. But with Thomas Frank, I have a lot of respect for him. But again, I'm not that thrilled exactly by the signing of him over at Spurs. I think, the big issue I might have is if Spurs were keen on actually going down a route of playing exciting, attack-minded football, which was part of the logic why they sacked Antonio Conte, diverted away from the Jose Mourinho, Nuno Espirito Santo days, was because they felt like the fans had made it very clear that they want to see the Tottenham way. They want to see high pressing, attack-minded football. I think Thomas Frank is capable of it, but I think since he's returned or since he brought Brentford to the Premier League, he made a huge stylistic change, from a very possession-based system to more of one that is pragmatic, changes every game or so. Like some games, yes, he maybe goes for more of a possession based style, but majority of the time when I have watched Brentford, I think they are a very conservative, pragmatic team that look to try to hit teams on the break, counterattacking, set pieces. Sometimes you see center backs like flooding the box, in certain moments. They have definitely a different way of playing than what we've been used to under Ange Postecoglou. And I'm not totally against it because I said to you that I don't mind defensive football, pragmatic football, but just going by what Spurs have said in the past about bringing in managers that try to play the Tottenham way, I'm a little bit concerned by the fact that I just don't think Thomas Frank is necessarily one of those guys. He definitely will probably keep us inside the top 10 if that's what the Spurs hierarchy care about, if that's what Spurs fans care about, is being at least inside the top 10 of the Premier League. I think he'll be able to achieve that. Is he a guy that's going to win us trophies? I have question marks over that. He doesn't necessarily have a huge record of being able to deliver trophies. But again, I have a lot of respect for him because I think he's one of the few managers, especially in the recent Premier League era, where taking a team up from the Premier League has shown to be, or into the Premier League from the Championship, has shown to be very hard. Maybe you can survive for one season, but most of the time you see them kind of go back down quite quickly. And the only managers I can think of in recent years that have been able to successfully keep their teams up for a long period of time was the likes of Sean Dyche, Marco Silva recently with Fulham, and then you'd also look at Thomas Frank at Brentford. I might be missing one or two, but apart from that, there haven't been too many teams that have actually stayed up for a long time after then leaving or after then leaving the championship. So Frank, he looks like a very safe type of manager to bring in. Is he a guy that's going to deliver us a huge Champions League run, a huge cup run, that type of thing? I'm not too sure. I think he's going to probably more be able to deliver us, I guess, a decent Premier League campaign. But I'm also a little bit skeptical about whether he can even get us inside the the Champions League spots or anything. So like I said, Dave, I have a lot of respect for him for what he's done at Brentford. I don't think he's a bad manager by any means, but with what Tottenham have said they wanted in the past, I'm not too sure if he checks out with what they said they wanted in the past.
Yeah, and look, I agree with you. I think rightfully so. He's garnered a lot of respect within the game. He's done a very good job with Brentford. He's praised for keeping them up. I wonder how much of it is also down to their recruitment. They very rarely miss in the transfer window, to be fair. And whatever they do sign, they usually end up selling on for top money. And that is a system put in place by the ownership, which, means Frank has consistently had good recruitment. Now, I take the point. You've also got to nurture that recruitment. And Thomas Frank has done a brilliant job in that. I also think when I look at him coming to Tottenham Hotspur, I think he'll have a solid from set pieces. That's one thing I've definitely taken away, especially from watching us against Brentford and them in general across the couple of campaigns in the Premier League, is that from set pieces going forward, they're a massive threat, but also defensively. And that is a huge problem of ours defensively. Set pieces, free kicks, corners coming into the box and stuff. He will have us solid from that. So that is a huge plus, which hopefully means you're not leaking as many goals or you're not as vulnerable from the set pieces and that. That's absolutely huge. I would also argue, I think he manages the media very well. At Brentford, he seems to have charmed the media. He gets a lot of good press written about him. A lot of managers, when they're asked about him, also have a lot of great things to say about Thomas Frank. And I think that's one trick that I think Postecoglou missed at Tottenham, Jack. With Postecoglou, it was almost rather than looking at the media and going, do you know what, I can get them. If I can get them on side, I'll get favourable coverage, which means there'll be less pressure on me and more scope for me to work with. Postecoglou didn't want to do that. He just almost goes, okay, that's your opinion. I want to prove you wrong. Thomas Frank isn't like that. And I just wonder, will he quell a lot of the outside noise around Tottenham down a little bit with his appointment, because he is very, very good in front of the media. And with that media, you can buy-in from fans, you can buy-in from your players if you say the right thing, and people up above as well, with how you handle media. So I think that'll be a good thing that Thomas Frank will also bring. I also think Thomas Frank is what's the right word, Jack? He's innovative. Like this season, I noticed early in games, he went straight at teams and got a bit of joy, namely against us, and he'd done that a couple of other times. He comes up with these little things, that other managers don't really come up with, that are very clever. I think that is a huge plus. But I do have a lot of concerns about the guy. I'm not going to lie. Like, for instance, if he's to come here, you have to give him a couple of his coaches, because the reason why is it helps with the transition process of him getting his message across of what he wants to do. His style of football, the transition will be a lot smoother, it'd be a lot easier, and it'd be a lot quicker if we can bring in some of his coaches. That's another area where I think Postecoglou sort of failed, and other managers have failed at Tottenham.
And Spurs have not usually done that, right? Bringing managers in, their whole coaching staff. Yeah.
Exactly. They're almost coming here solo, and it's like, right, well, you get them coaches we are already employing to implement what you want to do. So not only then do they have to, get the coaches up to speed, then they also have to go and try and relay that to players, and then he has to watch, over how they're doing it and stuff like that. With Thomas Frank, if you let him bring in these coaches, he can just almost trust them to get to work straight away. And I think that's absolutely vital in helping getting this guy and this project off the ground. So they need to let him bring in a couple. I would also argue, the fact that he's had a working relationship with Johan Lang. Hopefully that, they have that friendship there. It's well reported in the media. Look, I'm not Johan Lang's biggest fan, but my hope is now that if they do have that friendship, Johan Lang is more out of that friendship, more than likely going to try and actually get what Frank wants, rather than this is what we're bringing in, you make it work. Because I feel like that's where we've gone wrong under Jose Mourinho, Conte, and Postecoglou. We've brought in win-now managers and bought them players that they need to develop. They're never, ever the finished article. And when you're trying to build a team to go and try and challenge a Premier League and multiple cup competitions, you just don't have time to develop and nurture these guys. Especially in modern day football, and especially at Tottenham with our need for trophies over the last few years. No one's been given anyone any sort of time. So for me, I just hope that he brings in the right players for Thomas Frank. That will also help him massively. And I think in one of them, it's got to be a CDM. When I look at that Brighton team, Norgard, he's the guy that just sits in front of the centre backs, mops up. It's not a glamorous job, but it's a bit like what Højbjerg used to do us, just that bit of steel, mops up things, moves the ball on. That's absolutely crucial. That's been crucial to Thomas Frank, picking up these results against the big teams that he's been well applauded for and renowned for, is having that good defensive structure. And within that defensive structure, that CDM is absolutely crucial. So they are the things that Tottenham need to do in order to really help this guy kick on and get off to a good start. But where my concerns come in, Jack, many people attribute the 34 losses in the league under Ange Postecoglou of the last 2 seasons. This guy's lost 33, and that's where I struggle with it. It's like, if we're sacking a manager and the aim of the game is to win more games, I worry if Thomas Frank is that guy. Now, I take into account it's a lot harder to win games at Brentford than it is Tottenham Hotspur. I fully take that into account, and that's where I'm willing to give this guy a chance. Another huge concern of mine, huge concern of mine, Jack, is with Postecoglou over the 2 seasons. This is one of my big concerns, one of yours as well. It was almost, we were binning off competitions for prioritizing one. And we've always said here that competing across multiple competitions is the aim at Tottenham. Thank you for getting us over the line, but with Postecoglou, if he was to be given next season, we wanted him to be able to demonstrate he can do that over multiple competitions. Thomas Frank, he's never demonstrated that before. People can go, but he's never managed in Europe. Okay, fine. But what about the FA Cup? What about the League Cup? He's not known for having runs in them. He's just purely concentrated on the Premier League, 1 game a week. The guy's also never managed in Europe before. We're going into Champions League. We're at the elite level of Europe now. We're not in the Europa League. We're at the elite level now. And that's my big concern. It's a big difference managing 1 game every week than managing 3 games a week. And that's where I have my concerns about Thomas Frank, because, he's well renowned for coaching and improving players. But when you've got the time to do that on the training pitch, playing once a week, that's where you can see the full effect of it. At Tottenham, when you're, say, playing up in Manchester on the Sunday, out in Baku then on the Tuesday or Wednesday, and then back for another game probably in the capital, on the weekend. Where's your time on the football pitch to drill what you want to drill into these guys to really nurture that talent forward? It's not there.
Yeah.
Then that's where you then have to rely on your man management. Does he have that in him? I'm not quite so sure. But anything you want to say on what I've highlighted there? Because I have 1 or 2 more to go on.
A key point that you brought up there is he hasn't shown that he's had the experience. Maybe he will show that he can do it, but he doesn't have the experience of handling multiple competitions at the same time. In my memory of Brentford, I don't remember them going that deep in any cup run. I think maybe the last time they went really deep was when we had Jose Mourinho as manager, and I think Brentford were actually in the championship at the time, and Frank was about to bring them up into the Premier League, and he took them, to the semifinal, I think, of like the League Cup, and then we knocked them out there. But I can't remember any too many deep cup runs by the likes of Brentford. And now that he's going to have to manage the Champions League, the League Cup, the FA Cup, and the Premier League all at once, does he really have the experience to show that he can do that? I don't think he does. And like you brought up, that's kind of how a lot of Spurs managers have been judged. And I think it's a fair way to judge Spurs managers. Can you handle all these cup competitions? We're not expecting you to win all of them. We're not expecting you to perform incredibly in all of them, but we do expect some cup run of some kind. And we don't expect to be knocked out, immediately in any of them either, right? So how can you manage to do that? Give us at least some sort of, confidence in the Champions League that, maybe we can get to a quarterfinal, a semifinal, but then in the likes of the FA Cup, the League Cup, the same. Can you get us to a quarterfinal, a semifinal, if not maybe a final, right? And then also at the same time in the Premier League, finish respectably high enough, that we don't feel like we're being embarrassed week in, week out. And Frank has shown that he's not been able to do that. I mean, of course, he was only at Brentford, but still, right? He doesn't have the track record or the experience to show at various clubs that he can do that. I guess we'll find out if he can.
Yeah, and look, that like I said, that's a huge concern of mine. It's a complete different ball game from coming from Brentford to Tottenham Hotspur. There's so much more scrutiny on what you're doing, from the fan base, from the media, etc., etc. He's not going to get the grace he got at Brentford. At Brentford, they pop up with big results. He gets praise, but when they're losing games, no one really scrutinizes what's going on there. At Tottenham, that is going to be scrutinized heavily, But the one good thing is he does seem to have the personality to handle it. Just a couple of other things, Jack. I think you mentioned it. Style of play is a huge concern of mine. We can sit here and say we'll be okay with counter-attacking football or a more pragmatic approach to the game. But for me, that's just Johnny hindsight, to be quite frank with you. When we had Jose Mourinho, Conte, and Nuno, they were all chased out of this club when you stop winning games because people will not tolerate sitting off the opposition. And we can sit here now and say we will accept it. We won't. Then, when we sack Conte, people are moaning, we want to get back to the Tottenham way. We bring in Postecoglou, try, fail. And now all of a sudden we want to go back to a pragmatic way. I keep saying to people, style of football doesn't really matter. It's actually just winning games.
100%.
And does Can Thomas Frank do that over the course of a season or 2 seasons at Tottenham enough to piece the fan base? I'm a bit worried. At the end of the day, when you're a Tottenham manager, most games you're expected to dominate possession.
You're under so much more scrutiny.
Exactly, and break down the opposition. At Brentford, because of who they are, you are expected to play a more pragmatic game, a more counter-attacking game. And I look at Nuno. Nuno done a very good job at Wolves. People forget that, They go, look at the job Frank has done at Brentford. Look at the job Nuno done at Wolves before we brought him in here. He also took big scalps, played a more pragmatic way. But he couldn't adapt to a more attacking way at Tottenham Hotspur, and he was chased out of here very, very quickly, and the players weren't having him either, because the likes of Kane and Son, they want to attack. It's what Tottenham are known for. It's what we've done well under Pochettino and stuff like that. They want to go for games. So a lot of this squad, I don't think will accept that way. To play counter-attacking, you've got to be very disciplined. You got to be willing to play large parts of the game without the football. I don't see a lot of our players wanting to do that.
100%.
You look at Brentford, for instance. Here's a stat from last season. Bar Nottingham Forest, no team has completed fewer passes in the first half than Brentford last season. I mean, that's got to change at Tottenham Hotspur. Spurs fans will not tolerate us making very fewer passes than anybody else in the Premier League. He has to change that style of football, and I'm just not sure he will be able to for us.
100%. Even the point you made with Nuno. Nuno actually took Wolves to Europe at one point, right? But he still, was married to that very counter-attacking approach. I think what people are clinging on to with Frank is that various games he has shown, and you even brought it up, that he can adapt, that he can play a bit more of an attack-minded style. It's just he's going to have to do that on a more consistent basis with Tottenham Hotspur. Maybe every now and again we would accept, a defensive approach, but we're not going to accept that, game in, game out against every single team, right? And that's where a lot of concern comes from you and I. Is like, is he going to be able to actually show that he can play a more attack-minded style? Because like you brought up, Spurs fans criticize Conte and Jose, some of the best in the world at the counter-attacking, defensive-minded football, but they were chased out of this club for that style of play. Thomas Frank, great manager in my belief, but definitely not better than Jose or Conte was at that sort of approach, right? He's still respectable, but he's going to have to show that he has more range to his tactical approach, and we'll see if he's capable of it. Any other kind of final points you want to make on Frank? We're going to cover plenty about him over the next week or so.
I've 2 more quick points. This next one is quick, and it's off the back of what we're talking about here. In order to have that counter-attacking defensive solidity he had at Brentford, you need players with no egos about themselves. And you go and listen to the High Performance podcast, within the first few minutes, that's the first thing he talks about. I don't like egos. I don't like dickheads. Well, I'm sorry. You come to a club like Tottenham Hotspur where players are on 200 grand a week, 150 grand a week, and a certain level of club requires a certain level of player. They come with egos. How's he going to manage that? That's one of my concerns. He might turn around to Maddison and say, I want you to sacrifice. I want you to sit behind the ball and do large parts of the game without possession. I'm sorry. If you're James Maddison, your first thing you're going to do is go back to Brentford. Who are you? I'll be here longer than you will. So that will cause problems. It'd be interesting to see how Frank handles that. And lastly, this is where my big concern comes in, actually, Jack, is Postecoglou winning the Europa League. He brought demands and expectations, and almost was a victim of the demands and expectations he's brought by delivering that Europa League, because he delivered the success. Everyone goes, right, this is what we should be. Then they look at the league defeats and sack them. Fair enough. That's fine. And I'm over that now, onwards and upwards to the next thing. But with Postecoglou, even though after winning that Europa League final, it was evident that this squad needed massive investment to bring that quality up, to really go and compete in the Premier League, picking up some of the domestic cups, while also going to try and get somewhat competitive in the Champions League. It needed massive investment under Postecoglou because, like I said, when we very first hired him, he's not, what did I call it? Not a building,
astute, yeah.
He's not a manager that wants to build things. He's a here now, win now guy, which requires a certain level of player. And I think the board have looked at that. And when you hear all the rumors coming out before the Europa League final that, we are in a position where we have to find funds, we don't really have cash flow and stuff like that, I think they've assessed it and gone, okay, well, with Postecoglou, we know we have to go and bring in these players. we don't have the money, and we definitely don't want to do that anyway. Sack him, bring in Thomas Frank, a guy that's known for working on a shoestring budget and getting the most out of what he's got. And this is where my concern comes in. I think that's exactly what they're doing with Frank. And automatically that tells me this summer, dampen down the expectations of players of calibers of certain names. Tottenham are not going to do it. They're going to continue what they've been doing last summer, last January. Look to sign, younger players with potential that Thomas Frank can work with. And already that's setting them up for failure, Jack. We've got too many players that you need to develop, and we don't have enough players for the here and now that you can stick straight in and get. And the reason why you need them players is because they get you off to a good start, which then allows you time to develop other people. And it just shows to me that we're going to be having another tight summer this summer, and that we're not going to be bringing in the players of caliber that I really believe. Like, I'm of the opinion you can bring in whatever man you want, unless you give them better caliber of squad to work with. They're all going to suffer the same fate. And that's where my problem comes in. They've looked at it and they're trying to be the smart guy in the room. Rather than actually put the quality on the pitch that us fans demand and need now, they're going with a gamble on Thomas Frank. And they're going, let's see if he can, up the levels of this squad a little bit. And let's see where that takes us. And when I look at Frank, it doesn't exactly scream of me, I'm dreaming of winning something this season.
No,
with Conte, with Jose, they all had history of winning things everywhere they've been, which when you go into a season, you're like, what if? With Frank, I'm sort of expecting I'm hoping this guy can be some Houdini and get this squad up to a top half finish, because unless they bring a serious investment, I think he's going to suffer the same fate as everybody else, and he might even be out the door as quick as Nuno if they don't do that. And that's my big problem. And I think they've actually hoodwinked many fans by making this decision. All of a sudden, the expectations and that is gone. You look at anyone that's bigging up Thomas Frank, it's rebuilding. It's going to take time. Don't put too much pressure on him. It's already worked.
Yeah, well, I guess Frank must have the illusion or must have the dreams of trying to win something at some point in his career, and he thinks he might be able to deliver that at Tottenham Hotspur. Everybody, we're going to be talking plenty about him, so stick around this channel. Please smash the like button. Also, thank you to all the members of this channel for supporting us, especially throughout the summer. Plenty of content coming for you guys. I appreciate you all, and we'll see you all very, very soon. Come on, you Spurs. And Thomas Frank, we will trust when the announcement comes in. See you soon, everybody.
Frank engine. Choo-choo.